And let's take a look at credit in China. And of course, I'm going to talk about what has been all over the news, right? Corporate China credit, and specifically Evergrande. You say, oh, what am I going to talk about with Evergrande, right? Well, I'm going to show you a blue line. Blue line is cash flow, operating cash flow. Blue dot is cash on hand. And the stacked bars are the amount of obligations, the cash spent in debt service, interest, whatever. So what do we see? What we see, and this is an 2021 estimate. This is what we're looking at in 2020. By the way, it looked like this in 2018. It looked like this in 2018. So don't blame the pandemic. Don't blame the pandemic. This company had taken out so much debt that its debt service was nowhere near covered by its operating cash flow or all the cash on the books. And because you get 7 years of debt service information, everything else, you could actually find that in no time over the next 5 years, would Evergrande produce enough cash flow to possibly cover its obligations? So this is not a new thing. This is not pandemic related, this problem that Evergrande's having. All right? This is a very serious issue. That is a making of the company's own problems. They grossly over-indebted themselves without the cash to cover their debt service. Fact. All right? This is just data. This is not an opinion. This is fact. And this, by the way, this slide looks just like this if I use 2019 numbers back in 2018. It was just scary. What happened is they just kept rolling their debt over. Oh, we'll just refinance that debt into next year. And then next year, what do? They refinance the debt into the next year. And then what do? They refinance it the next year. Well, they keep doing that. Well, of course, you can get out of trouble until at some point the chickens come home to roost. And by the way, the credit agencies didn't catch on until like September of 2020, like long after anybody could have looked at these numbers and said, Evergrande's going to be in a lot of trouble, aren't they? Now I'm going to show you Wonders Information. I say, who is this? Oh, you wouldn't know them, but it's an IT consulting company. Now, why am I showing this? Because this is not a real estate firm. And by the way, this is a $1 billion plus firm in China, right? You can see its ticker is 300168. That means it's a Chinese company, right? That's 6 digits. And let me show you their credit cash flow again, right? Well, there's the blue line. There's the blue dot. That means blue line is cash they generate. Blue dot is just all the cash sitting on their books that they have. And then this gigantic debt service block, that's at hash red, and then interest expense, and then maintenance capex and money they need just to run the business and keep it going, just to keep it going. There is no way this company, right, in 2020, you would have thought, and this is not a real estate company, this is IT consulting, right? Now, we calculate this thing called intrinsic CDS. Now, it gets better if they make it through 2021, so I hope they get the refinancing, which maybe they will. If the Chinese government feels that they deserve it, they'll figure out a way. The local government, the Chinese government at the federal level will find a way to say, oh, maybe we need to help this company refinance itself. Otherwise, they're going to have to fire all their people. All their people are going to be fired in this $1 billion company if they're not successful at getting this restructured. But they're going to have to restructure it. Now, our ICDS is saying this score, anytime you see this score above 500, it means it's junk debt. So we actually calculate this on all companies in China. Every publicly listed company in China that we can get our hands on the data, we calculate this, ICDS. CDS is a credit default swap. So we use a number that you can compare against a credit default swap. It's sort of like a Z-score. Those of you on the call that have done any credit research or remember your basic credit analysis class, there's a thing called an Altman Z-score. The problem is the Altman Z-score is based on accounting pronouncements that are 40, 30 years old. So using an Altman Z-score today doesn't make any sense because the algorithm hasn't been updated for new accounting and it doesn't clean up the accounting. So you get a garbage in, garbage out problem. But if you do a uniform Z-score, right? I mean, what Altman was onto is great. It's just that it hasn't been improved much in 40 years. You use a uniform Z-score, then you get this ICDS of 910, all right? So let me show you another company. This is just an electronic equipment company, all right? Not consulting, not real estate, electronic equipment, nothing to do with real estate. I'm making a point. People are saying, oh, China's having problems in real estate. And I'm like, it's not just real estate. So first off, they don't even generate, it's negative cash flow. They have cash on hand, which is still getting them only to not even break even. in cash flow. And then they get this giant debt service, and it doesn't get much better over the next 5 years. We assume they're going to get to break even cash flow, at least, right? We assume they won't be burning cash. But even then, how are you going to pay your interest payment? Do I think they're going to go bankrupt? They're definitely junk debt with an ICDS of 1,000. Now, why am I showing this? Because if I look at corporate China in September of 2021, now these are actual slides I've shared with the Department of Defense and our big institutional investor clients. In September 21, those three companies I just showed you, there were 350 companies in China that look like that. Do you know what that means? That's scarier than US in 2008. That is a bigger credit crisis than even in 2008. 2008, we wouldn't have found that many companies. Maybe it would be around 350, maybe in the United States and in Europe, right? But here's what it looks like right now. If we take all the companies with an ICDS above 500 basis points, meaning a Z-score that looks really, really bad, how many companies do we have? Over 1,400. Well, I'm only looking at 5,000 companies. That means like almost a third of corporate China, public listed companies, would be given a default risk of junk rating if Moody's, S&P, and Fitch were covering them. They're not, right? Moody's, S&P, and Fitch only cover the biggest companies that pay for Moody's, S&P, and Fitch to cover them. But if they cover them, right, you would see this. You would see junk debt all over the place. China's corporate credit situation is a terrible, terrible situation. Meaning there's 1,400 companies that look like this picture. Cash flow, not sufficient to cover debt service or any other obligations, and not just for this year and for ensuing years. This is not a problem that's pandemic related. This is a problem that started 5, 6, 7 years ago. Now, when you have a country with a credit crisis like this, guess what happens to tax revenue? It starts falling, right? Tax revenue starts falling, and that's what we've been seeing in China, right? And this is an important point because this is where government generates power. Government can't spend GDP. A government can't spend corporate revenue. You can't just go and take the corporate revenue of the companies and the government says, oh, I'm going to take that revenue and spend it. There'll be no companies left, right? They have to tax. And it's only through taxes that a government has economic power, right? And by the way, as taxes and this credit crisis have been forming, because I keep telling you this has been forming for a while, look at Chinese investment in other places. This is basically Belt and Road. So the red bar is M&A transactions, Chinese companies buying outside China companies. The yellow is Ministry of Finance and State Administration of Foreign Exchange, Chinese global FD assets. So no matter what metric we're using, this problem started 2015, 2016. It did. This corporate credit crisis started long before the pandemic, and it's been affecting China FDI. China is investing less and less and less outside China. Why? Because they've got to shore up their capital to save, and I hope they do, meaning I want China to, this is not anti-China call, I'm just showing you data, right? I want China to survive, and so they need to stop investing all over the world. They need to put money into restructuring all these Chinese companies to get them healthy again, right? And it's going to take years. It's not going to be 6 months or a year or pandemic rebound. It's going to take a decade or more. When you look at USA's credit, first let me show you Amazon. Amazon, I don't know if people know this, Amazon has $50 billion of debt. That's a lot of debt, $50 billion. But I want to show you the same chart with Amazon. This is total obligations, interest, R&D, everything Amazon could possibly spend, right? And here's the operating cash flow. Very good cushion, well above even a growing spend line for Amazon, because it does grow its total spend line. And then cash on hand, that alone is more than the entire stack bar. Meaning, even if Amazon made no money this year, the cash on hand could cover all of their debt service and interest expense and everything else. Well, again, I'm showing you a microcosm of the United States. Again, I'm saying Amazon kind of looks like corporate America. Corporate America is investing like crazy. There's R&D being spent and everything else. But operating cash flow is more than enough to, the U.S. has a lot of debt. But the debt isn't due this year or next year. It's spread out evenly over time. This is for most U.S. corporations. Maybe not Hertz. But no offense to Hertz company. We probably don't need another car rental company out there. Hertz is probably necessary. Sorry to say Hertz, but Hertz's problems aren't pandemic related, by the way. Hertz had credit issues, much like China, that started 5, 6, 7 years ago. They just didn't come to fruition until the pandemic. Anyway, here's corporate America. Ready? This is all of corporate America companies with debt, kind of like Amazon. More than enough cash, more than enough cash. We're talking like in the trillions of dollars to cover all of their obligations, debt service, and then cash on hand, cash on corporate balance sheets. That's such a big number. It could easily cover any year, even if we had a pandemic. And that's part of what happened is in the pandemic year, when this blue line collapsed in 2020, there was so much cash on hand, the company said, we've got a cushion. And so we didn't see widespread bankruptcies or defaults in the US in public listed companies in the US. We did see in private companies because the private companies weren't as well balanced in terms of their cash and their debt service, but it was for public listed companies, which is why we rebounded. The corporate America rebounded in 2020 like amazing.